In the ancient world, royal chronicles served as sophisticated public relations. Kings commissioned these texts to bury their failures, airbrush their defeats, and present themselves as flawless, godlike figures to their subjects. The book of 2 Samuel deliberately breaks that mold. It offers a biography of Israel's most celebrated ruler, a man described as after God's own heart, while explicitly documenting his work as a conspirator, an adulterer, and a murderer. The text leaves these two versions of David to sit uncomfortably together. We are presented with a spiritual giant who is simultaneously capable of destroying a family to hide his own crimes. By refusing to hide these scandals, the narrative shifts the focus away from the royal mask. It forces us to look past the symbols of authority to see what actually happens to a leader when their reputation is stripped away. Before reaching that collapse, the text establishes David's early moral standard. When two commanders assassinate his political rival, Ishbosheth, and bring David the severed head expecting a reward, David executes them. He refuses to build his administration on a foundation of betrayal. He follows this with a move that was practically unheard of in ancient politics. Instead of purging the bloodline of the previous king, Saul, David seeks out Saul's crippled grandson, Mephibosheth. He pulls him out of hiding and grants him a permanent, honored seat at the royal table. We see this same lack of pretension when he brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. David strips off his royal robes to dance with the commoners in the street. When his wife Michal mocks him for acting beneath his dignity, David insists he is happy to look even more undignified to show his devotion. At this moment, David is at the peak of his ethical and spiritual authority. He has unified the tribes through grace rather than force, which makes the upcoming moral failure a complete catastrophe for the nation. The pivot point occurs in chapter 11. It's the season when kings typically lead their armies into battle, but David stays behind in the luxury of his palace. He chooses comfort over the duty he owes his men. This diagram maps the fall, starting with isolation. David sees Bathsheba, expanding into the decision to summon her. When she gets pregnant, the chart becomes a tightening trap. Failing a cover-up, the king orchestrates a state-sponsored murder, abandoning her husband Uriah on the battlefield. The tragedy is highlighted by the contrast in loyalty. Uriah refuses to sleep in his own bed while his fellow soldiers are still camping in the dirt, while the king who should be leading them is busy arranging Uriah's death. This sequence demonstrates how absolute power removes the guardrails of accountability. Without anyone to tell him no, David's private compromise evolves into a lethal conspiracy. 2 Samuel establishes a clear rule: divine forgiveness does not remove earthly consequences. The prophet Nathan confronts David with a curse: the sword will never leave his house. This fracture begins immediately within the royal family. David's eldest son, Amnon, assaults his half-sister Tamar. In response, Tamar's brother, Absalom, murders Amnon, splintering the household and eventually launching a civil war to seize the throne from his father. The corruption even reaches David's inner circle. His most trusted advisor, Ahithophel, joins the rebellion. When the coup eventually fails, Ahithophel takes his own life, leaving a grim parallel for the betrayal of Judas hundreds of years later. Even in his old age, David's pride continues to trigger national disasters. He demands a military census to measure his own strength, disregarding the warnings of his generals. The result is a plague that costs the lives of 70,000 citizens. The text shows that the moral failures of a leader are never contained. They infect the integrity of the entire nation, leaving the public to pay the price for the king's ego. We are back to this central problem. After all the bloodshed, the cover-ups, and the national trauma, why is David still considered the model for a great king? The difference is found in the response to failure. When the previous king, Saul, was confronted, he made excuses and tried to save face. When Nathan corners David, the king offers no defense. He immediately admits, "I have sinned against the Lord." This submission is visible when David flees his own palace. A man named Shimei follows the caravan, screaming curses and striking the ground with rocks. When his guards offer to kill the man, David stops them. He accepts the public shaming as part of his own path to restoration. David's strength isn't his perfection, but his total lack of defensiveness. He refuses to weaponize his power to protect his ego, placing himself entirely under the weight of divine justice. The narrative concludes with a final act of accountability. To stop the plague he caused, David must build an altar at the threshing floor of a man named Araunah. Araunah tries to give the king the land and the animals for free, but David refuses. He insists on paying the full price, stating that he will not offer a sacrifice that costs him nothing. This site of costly repentance became the location where Solomon would eventually build the temple. The center of the nation's worship was literally founded on a spot where a leader had to own his failures and pay for his restoration. The life of David suggests that the value of a leader isn't measured by an absence of failure. Instead, it is found in the honesty of their repentance and the willingness to take responsibility for the wreckage they have caused.